Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast where we're talking about the top 10 issues in healthcare that AHLA sees for coming in 2025. Today, we're talking about number 8, which is who do you sue? Medical malpractice in the age of AI. Speaking with one of the authors from this article, which is Anjali Dooley from DBM Legal Services. My name is Shalyn Watkins, and I'm an attorney at Holland Knight, where I work in our healthcare regulatory practice. I'm also a vice chair of education for the AHLA Healthcare Liability and Litigation Practice Group, which is hosting today's podcast. All right, Anjali, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Anjali Dooley. I am a healthcare regulatory corporate transactional attorney. I work for Duncan Bergman and Mandel. We call ourselves DBM Legal Services. They're based out of New York, New Jersey, but we're across the nation. We're fully basically remote law firm. Doing corporate transactions, but I've been in healthcare regulatory for now almost 20 years. I've watched a lot of things change. It's constantly changing now. And so I was at a party and this article kind of came to my attention, and I was already asked to do an article, and I was like, oh, let me write about this because I was talking to a doctor friend of mine, and she works for Mayo, and she gave me some insight on what was going on. So it was just one of those things that kind of naturally happened, and it was an interesting piece. So I ended up writing about it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I've seen as a trend in healthcare right now when everyone's talking about AI. There's a lot of like panic and scares that are happening from every element of healthcare, right? Be it the
Right.
provider side of work, the developers, well, regulations are not catching up necessarily with the fast pace of the technology. So there's a lot of questions out there.
Right, right. There are a lot of questions. I mean, some are news. I felt like some are definitely new questions because, like you said, AI and technology is moving so fast, but some are like, okay, are we answering the same question just using artificial intelligence as another tool? Is it a tool? Is it, you know, like I think we sometimes treat artificial intelligence as a whole new person in the conversation, right? Like it's like an actual human being. So I don't know. It's very hard to separate at some points, but and I think that's where doctors are scared. They're like, oh, are we going to be replaced by AI? But I I say no, and we'll get into why I don't think that's going to happen as well, based on like negligence, strict liability, all of those questions that we're going to talk about. So,
Definitely. As a side note, I often think that some of the fear that we're experiencing is the fact that we've been watching robot movies for decades now. And we just worry that the robots can do everything and will do everything. But I think that's kind of the beauty of your article. It does kind of talk about the nuances here and how there are different layers of liability that kind of come in with the implementation of AI usage in healthcare. So let's dig into it for sure.
okay.
You made your article really easy to read because you also sectioned it off. So, guilty enough, I want to ask you questions about each section. Um,
Okay.
First, being your accountability for AI decisions
Okay.
section. When I read it, I was thinking a lot about the fact that, we're seeing now a lot of state medical boards are starting to weave in the AI conversation and the unprofessional conduct concepts.
Mhm.
You see, even the FDA has had its good machine learning practices and standards for the development of AI.
Mhm.
Um, and I wonder, will either of these areas kind of drive up litigation risk between the two groups, the providers or the developers, for example? Um, you have kind of this negligence per se. If the regulation says you're supposed to be doing X, does that mean that by default, the provider or the developer, by non-complying with these regulations or this guidance, would be negligent?
Again, I think there's layers to that question. So let's take the provider, and I always go with the physician or the clinician side of it. So when you're talking about state medical boards and what they're implementing in professional conduct, I think here's where I think AI should be kind of separated from clinical. Like ultimately it's the physician that's making the clinical decision making. We have, now we have Google. Let's just say Google. I'm as a mother, I do it all the time. Is Robitussin good with, whatever medication I'm giving, and Google gives me an answer, and I kind of rely on that answer. I come from a family of docs though, so both my parents are physicians. So I call one of them up and I say, "Hey, Google told me this," and they're like, "Yeah, actually you can," right? But ultimately, after 50 years of medical decision making, or 10 years or 5 years, you're trained on the human body. AI is trained on the inputs of people and codes, right? So AI is not trained on this human body and what we're seeing and touching and feeling, and what a doctor touches and feels and looks at and observes and all of those things, right? So that's a simplistic like Robitussin, but there are some things that are really, really obviously complex, right? So I think medical boards are saying, hey, if you haven't, it's kind of like digital health and telemedicine, right? You haven't seen this person in person.
Mhm.
You're relying on AI to give you this answer. Why'd you even go to medical school then, right? Like, that kind of situation. So I think medical boards are trying to implement safeguards, right? And saying like, hey, clinicians, you are ultimately responsible still because you're if you're only relying on the AI,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Now, take that another step, right? Then you have the company that developed a product or an instrument or something that is AI driven, and they put in all of this data. So the physician has used it multiple times, no issues, things, happen. Well, that data that was inputted into this device is wrong, right? And so the physician didn't solely rely on that, but he's used it many times. This time it didn't do the right outcome. That can happen. And so who's liable in that situation is very different than just simply saying, I didn't ask this patient any questions. He said he had a cold, and, I relied on my auto thing on my phone and dispensed him this medication, and he had a side effect and reaction and stuff. I don't think any doctor is that stupid to do that, but that I know of anyway. But there might be, and stuff on that. And I mean, I know what's coming out. They're saying, I forgot what company is developing this, but they're doing a doc in a box where a person walks into this room that like can diagnose what's wrong with you. Well, who's going to be liable for that, right?
Mhm.
It's going to be the company that developed that box that you walk into. It's kind of like a all over x-ray or something. I don't know. So these are new things that are coming up. So it's going to be interesting as we get into more and more of this and we litigate how this kind of plays out and what law is developed. But again, malpractice is local, right? So it depends on where you live, right? Standard of care is local. So we haven't even, what is the standard of care in that jurisdiction? And I think these are all questions that are going to come into, we don't have any standards. That's the problem, is like, we don't have any standards, right? So this is all going to be coming into how medical boards treat each situation case by case, how the case is argued in court case by case. In Georgia, it could be one thing, in Illinois, it could be another. We don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's actually terrifying to me to hear of the doc in the box that I'm like, is AI going to get its medical license? I don't know. Like, who's even able to sit for a medical board exam? I have no idea. You've got me thinking a million more questions.
Yeah.
Um, and moving to the second kind of part of your article, we talk about strict liability versus negligence, which I found very interesting.
Mhm.
Have there, at least in your experience, has there been any examples from past diagnostic tools that might demonstrate who would win in this fight? Of, if there would be a strict liability or if this would just be a negligence issue, considering that the tool would have been created by a developer that has kind of marketed its product as something that could be relied upon by physicians?
Right. So obviously with strict liability, I think it would be a product liability case, right? So I think AI would be the product, right? In this situation. So I mean, in strict liability, it was defective, right? That's all you have to really prove. And it was unreasonably dangerous and, and that defect caused the plaintiff's injury. So if that happens, for example, I think there's past case laws in private, but I like quickly looked up something. I had to use my, but I think there's a Medtronic case, Beto v. Medtronic, and it's 1993, right? And it's strict liability and product, pacemaker, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think we're going down that path as is artificial intelligence just the diagnostic tool, or is it the decision maker? Like that's where we are, right? Like who's the decision maker here, right? In this situation, who's trained on this tool? Like I don't think every physician should be able to use AI, right? Because it's maybe used as a is it, used for diagnosis, but ultimately, who's the ultimate decision maker? Is it that tool or is it that doc?
I think
Right.
you also bring up the point that, if you're thinking about training of physicians, right, maybe the medical schools right now could be implementing AI as part of the training of, young doctors. But imagine someone who's been practicing for 50, 60 years trying to implement AI in their practice. It might give extremely different results. I think we're seeing that even in the practice of law now as we try to use AI as part of our tools, right? The younger lawyers are just a little bit better at using it than us older lawyers.
Right. Well, that's a good point. So in medical school, they should implement using very tested, like AI diagnostic tools, I would think. Like it's been tested, but how can you have years of testing if we don't even have years of AI, right? So but also what we're finding is I'm talking to my parents are in their 70s and still working, right? And I can guarantee they don't use AI. My dad refuses to. Like he doesn't even want to get on a Zoom. He doesn't do telemedicine either. But he's still working and he's like, well, physicians have to they went to medical school, so you have to use your mind. You have to use your skills of detection, your eyes, your what's in there. Now, as a diagnostic, maybe we use it to find rare things that we wouldn't have discovered before, right? And that's what the medical school. But what if you have medical school students who are relying on AI? I mean, we see it in high school. We're going to see it across the board in college and things. They're literally not thinking for themselves, right? They're relying on tools that are helping them, right? And they're not thinking for themselves. Like the good lawyers who use AI, I think we were like, okay, here are all these questions that I have, but we're going to go review this again. And then we're going to make sure the case law is accurate. And we're not going to submit something that is not double, triple checked, right? But we need a starting point.
Right.
And I think AI is a starting point right now in healthcare versus let's just rely on it.
Yeah.
Right? Don't you? I mean, I
I
think
think that's right. Yeah. I think that actually brings us kind of to the third point in your article, and something you were talking about a little bit earlier, which is about, the data that's being input is also an extremely important part of
that.
this analysis, right? And so you talk
Right.
about data lineage and how there's this balance that needs to happen between algorithmic design and integrity. So how do you ensure that the data that's being input is being analyzed by a non-biased AI? Like, does this itself, the existence of bias, create another litigation risk of some sort for developers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing it. And I think that's what the Mayos and the Geisingers and the Kaisers are all struggling with, right? And people are getting sued over this, right? There's bias in, let's take policing. Let's take policing. AI can be used in policing or TSA or whatever. I'm flying on this weekend. So like I'm going out of the country this weekend. So I'm just like, what are they looking like there's bias in that, right? There's racial bias, there's, all sorts of things, and that is coming into play. And I think, like I said in my article, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you don't input the right data and figure out what is the ground truth, there is going to be bad outcomes by using AI and misdiagnoses in situations because as an Indian person, I of nationality, I don't have sometimes the same, we have a higher, like women, we have a higher rate of heart disease or whatever, right? So might not, based on my age, my weight, and all this kind of stuff, it might not be able to diagnose that properly because they don't know my racial background, right? And and a lot of physicians don't put that racial background or take into consideration. A lot of them are not trained on it, right?
Right.
So if they're not trained on it, how is the AI tool going to be trained on it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
It's almost interesting because the question is, can you teach the AI all the biases to weed out? Because bias is very human, and health equity concerns, even before AI, have been, bringing up these kinds of
Right.
questions of the implicit bias that occurs in the practice of medicine all the time.
Right. So like kidney disease is prevalent in the black community. And if based on just pure data, it might not be able to calculate because you have to input stuff like black male at this, and you have to input those other data points in there to make the diagnoses correct, because not all things are based on height, weight, and things like that, right? It's genetics, it's all of these different things that they don't understand, people don't understand. So I think we're very far from getting really accurate diagnoses. I think it's a starting point. It's basically my Robitussin sample question, right? Does Robitussin have a, so like, can you take Sudafed and Robitussin? That's like my question every single time. I forget the answer is, can you take Sudafed and Robitussin together? Because I don't want anything to happen to my kid or something like that. But I think that's where we are at. We're at that level, and we're not quite at the levels that we should be. And that means that there's still so many questions to be answered, right? I mean, I can give another example with dermatology, how for darker complected people, we still get skin cancer, right? We still need to wear sun protection and stuff, but AI doesn't know that necessarily because they're looking just at
Yeah.
the camera, that's taking the picture, and maybe like, okay, well, you know, they have a lawyer, but there is a risk, you know, and things like that. So there's just certain things that I just don't think we're quite ready for. And you know, so there's still so much to do, and there's just, again, no standards for this.
Right. Well, I think that comes to the piece on validation, which I mean, I may be creating more issues by asking the question, but you know, there are some people who would say that this bias is going to exist whether or not AI is used, right? Because there's also going to be practitioners who are not considering things based on implicit biases that they may have. Um, so is it even possible to ensure that the AI is going to be reliable? And I take your Robitussin question, right? If I've gotten very comfortable Googling my symptoms and expecting the internet to tell me what's wrong, is there really much difference in the provider doing the same thing? You know,
Yes.
maybe I've created a spiral of conspiracies within my head that, you know, that I need you to talk me down from.
Right. So I do think that. So I'll go, like, doctors hate it when us as like non-physicians come in and say, well, I read on WebMD, I Googled all my symptoms, and I've read on WebMD that. My dad is like, absolutely, when I start off that conversation with that, he's like, stop reading. Stop reading, that's my job, right? And so because, again, I think what has evolved, and this is society in general, I can take it from healthcare to just personal relationships. We've relied on the use of technology and not human. Again, the mind, the touch, the seeing a person, you know, we're relying on you know, so many things. But like, if, for example, in this situation, what if we were using AI and that AI automatically updated, just like our iPhones automatically updated, and that update had a bug in it, right? And that bug that goes down that, well, let's go down this path, you know, and that bug, you know, makes some diagnostic accuracy worse instead of better, then who is responsible in that situation? So how do we ensure that reliability? I mean, I think where I'm getting at is that we're relying too much on technology and AI, and we're not relying on our human capabilities and what we've been trained to do, whether we're a lawyer, a physician, or whatever. We've been trained to think, you know, as lawyers. Like, if we don't put the question right in Chat GPT, you know, I'm going to look at that answer going, what the heck, this is not the right answer, you know, and stuff. So I think that's the again, like you said, human decision making has to be first, and then I think the use of AI is second. And I think we're just not there. And I don't know if we'll ever be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's going to be countries, I think Australia, I know India is doing it, where kids can't use AI it's banned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Off of phones and things like that, because, again, people aren't using their minds to think.
Yeah.
You know, it's coding, it's doing yes, no, zero, ones and stuff like that. You're not really trained on humanity. As I saw, this has nothing to do with this article, but kind of does. The NVIDIA CEO, he said, who do I hire? I hire people trained in sociology, psychology, history, all of those social areas, versus person that can code, because I can tell AI how to code me.
Yeah.
Right. So you need the thinker. And I think that's where I got from the party that I was at, when the doctor, she works for Mayo, and she's not a clinical physician, but she's doing a ton of AI work for Mayo. And these are questions they're asking. They're thinking about it. They're actually doctors out there thinking like, how can we want to use it? We think it can be accurate, but how do we use it ethically, morally, intellectually right? Way to use it, right? And I think there's people thinking about this, and that's why this kind of came up for me. And there's no, again, the standards around it, and are so like, just like we have compliance, right? There has to be that compliance officer that, like, at a hospital, let's just say, that is continuously monitoring AI use. And that's their only job, maybe, because it's so prevalent, and are we using the right testing models? Are we, using, are things getting updated? Are they auditing in real time AI, how our AI is being used and the tools that are being used? Is there going to be a certification process in this, right? Like, is there going to be a certification? There has to be.
Yeah.
I think that if you don't know how to use it, like that 60-year-old doctor that doesn't know how to use it, don't let him use it, right?
Yeah, for
Unless
sure.
he's trained and gets the certificate on it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think that's right.
Right.
Um, so what would you say are the key takeaways of this topic for what we're going to expect in this new year, 2025?
2025. I think, well, um, we're, I think to gain efficiency, and let's go down the efficiency path for a minute. To gain efficiency, I don't think AI is going to be used. There is some efficiency let's use it for the things that we can make things efficient. Is it going to be efficient for scribing? Is it going to be efficient for the administrative tasks? Sure. And let's use it for that. I think you're going to see a lot more of that in 2025, is for physicians to make their lives a little bit easier, hopefully. Maybe it'll make it harder. They thought the EHR was going to make it easier, but it's not really. They have more burnout of physicians, right, using EHR. So are physicians going to be replaced? I highly doubt it, right? Or clinicians in general, nurses, doctors, whatever. Are we going to be replaced? I think there's certain areas that we can make efficient. Are lawyers going to be replaced? I highly doubt it. You know what? Maybe what's going to be replaced is a legal assistant, possibly, right? So that one layer of administration, I think we're going to see a lot more efficiency, and we're going to see people that are trained as docs, trained as nurses or PA. Those are going to rise. The good trained ones are going to rise up, but we're going to see some of these administrative tasks get a lot easier, I think, and faster in 2025. I think we have a long way to go before a doctor is replaced. I really do.
Yeah, I think to take it back to my robot movie analysis from earlier, since we've all been watching those robot movies, we want to avoid them taking over the world. So we're always going to have that stopgap at the end of the story. There's got to be a human who can turn everything off.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm watching Paradise, and right now
Yeah, I'm literally watching the same show.
I'm
So
like, oh my God, this can happen, and stuff. And there's going to be replacement of like the whole cities and things like that. But I don't, I really think it's just like any other tool. I think AI, what I predict is going to happen, is that AI is going to be a sole diagnostic tool. There's going to be some regulations surrounding AI use and how we're going to use it. And there's going to be medical boards going to have to catch up everywhere. And every medical board is going to have to put in ethical standards. It's going to have to put in unprofessional conduct standards. It's just going to be like that lawyer whoever, I think it was in New York, where submitted a brief and they used bad case law because there was hallucinations in AI. in using the case law. I'm like, who doesn't check their case law before submitting a brief, right? I mean, I thought that was just silly. They just submitted it. So I think there's going to be some additional work to double check, but I think there is going to also be some efficiencies. It's just like in anything else, right, that we do. So it's going to be, it might make a clinician's life a little bit easier. It might make a pharmacist's life a little bit easier. Pharmacy is where I think it's going to be like very, very important. But again, clinical trials, they're getting faster and faster, right, for new drugs. I mean, we didn't even go there and talk about that, but clinical trials and AI use, they're using a smaller population, right?
Mhm.
So is there going to be a bias in drugs interactions? So I think this is going to be something that is really, we're going to see a lot more litigation in it too,
Mhm.
in the use. And I just don't think plaintiffs' attorneys, there's some that have already figured it out, and I don't have case law in front of me, but I think there's going to be a lot more litigation in this as well. To
Right.
get those rules solidified in writing and regulations in writing on how things have to operate with AI. And the only way that's done and policies are changed is if somebody has to pay a lot of money because they solely rely on that, right? And
Right.
there's going to be litigation surrounding it.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Anjali. I really had fun talking to you about this and going down our own death spiral. I just want to encourage our listeners to go back and read the top 10 issues in health law article that is out on the AHLA website. And just as a reminder, we were talking today about number 8, who do you sue? Medical malpractice in the age of AI.
All right. Thanks, Shalyn.